Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score, your friendly show where Jacob and I basically pour over all the stats and all the box scores and all of the advanced metrics and film we didn't get a chance to get to on Monday on our extended show here. And we thank everybody who has joined us along the way so far. So we try to build this show from the ground up. And today we have a fun episode for you. It's a spooky episode. It's Halloween. I'm not the guy who gets into all of that. So I'm going to let Jacob and Dave have their fun that way. I was thinking about it and I was like, I got nothing on this front. I'm just here to talk football. But I am happy because today we have Hall of Famer, and yes, that's right, Hall of Fame fantasy football analyst. I know he's gonna not like that intro, and I see him nodding already, but it's the truth. Just speaking facts. It's Dave Richard, and I'm so excited to get Dave on the show because basically what we're doing here over at Beyond the Box Score is having fun and getting everybody on. And we wanted to make sure we got the OGs from FFT on because first we started with Seth Wald and all these guys from outside, but it's important to get the OGs on because that's people who paved the way for us. And I'll give a quick aside here. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Dave has a special place in my heart because when I came over from the NFL team at CBS Sports to Fantasy, I didn't know anybody, and Dave was the first to welcome me over. And since I've been on this team, every single step of the way, and I really mean this, Dave, he's been there for me. He's been willing to spend the time with me at any step of the way. And his passion for this is similar to mine. So that's something that I always appreciate about you, Dave. So I know you don't want to spend too much time on this, and I'm sure you didn't love the Hall of Fame thing, but I had to do it. Dave, how are you today, my friend?
I'm good. You know, RJ told me take care of the new guy, and so I was like, all right, I'll be nice to the new guy.
That's simple as that, right?
And you're a lot of fun to talk to, and Jacob, you're a lot of fun to talk to, and you're both interesting to listen to. And I read everything that you tweet. With Jacob, that's a lot.
Wow.
You guys, you have a lot of good information, and you bring it combined with smart opinions to the forefront. So honestly, I'm just happy to get a seat at the cool kids table finally. And this is the show that I've kind of wanted to be on because you guys watch film, you guys crunch the numbers, you guys are doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. I've on occasion daydreamed about what it would be like if the three of us shared like an FFPC team. You know what I mean? Or
I would love to see
one of those high stakes leagues where all we're doing is we're watching film and then, telling each other about it on a Monday afternoon or something like that. Also that we can take down a huge prize. The thought has crossed my mind.
That'd be fun. I'm psyched to have Dave here because last week we had Nate Tice on and Dan just couldn't control his excitement. And he's like, this is the best ball knower, best ball talker of all time. I'm like, well, let's bring on Dave Richard, man. That's one of the best ball talkers I know.
Exactly, Dave. I think one thing that has always impressed me about going through, and obviously when I'm in this role as an editor, I get to read everybody's work. I get to kind of talk through it with everyone. One thing that's always impressed me about your work is the depth that you've put into it. And sometimes we try to get it to be like, let's turn this into 5 or 6 articles rather than one, just because of the way the industry is moving. But like when you look at the lineup decisions, what you're getting there is essentially what Jacob and I are delivering, both on the podcast, but also from Jacob's standpoint in the newsletter. It's that in-depth, let's take a look at the coverages. Let's take a look at the things that we can try to unpack to find an edge, because that's what fantasy is about. But that's kind of where I want to start with you, Dave. Like, I wanted to get your take on how the industry has changed from when you first started to now, and like where you're finding edges now versus when it was versus that beginning part.
So way back in the day, and for those who don't know, I've been working on fantasy football. I've been playing since the late 90s and like doing it for a living since effectively 2003. What year is it now? I've been doing this for 21 years.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm old. The information is really the biggest thing. There was a time when the NFL and I worked on behalf of the NFL. They would not share coaches' film. You couldn't get it. And so when you wanted to go and rewatch a game, first of all, the internet, like, you get highlights at best. And then the data that we had back then, nothing like what it is now. I mean, I almost think now there's too much data and you could really get buried in it. Dan, you know that sometimes I do get buried in it.
Yeah.
And it's too much stuff. And now we're at the point where the fantasy content creators are creating their own data. And that's really fascinating to me. Like, that's how far that we've come, is that people are starting to figure out, okay, how can we measure, an average separation between a receiver and the closest defensive back, and not just do it for just targets, but literally every rep receiver runs, and you think, goodness, over the course of a game, receivers running 35 routes, sometimes more. That's a lot to keep track of, and there's just a ton that is out there. A lot of information. You could almost make it now, and I've seen fantasy analysts do this. I know Matthew Berry has used this as an example. You could make the case for or against anybody, no matter the matchup, no matter the player.
Right.
It might be really hard for somebody like Derrick Henry or something like that, but most part, like you could make the argument for everything. So how do you do that and make sure that you're giving what's real? And the best thing to do in that is just don't rely entirely on stats, and that's you got to watch it. You got to watch
And
it.
I love that. And I love that that's part of your process, Dave,
Yeah.
because like I thought real quick, sorry. I thought you
No, I was
gave
rolling. It's all good.
Oh no, I just think it's the perfect example is somebody you just brought up. And it's somebody we shared this opinion on this offseason, Derrick Henry, because there were stats out there and there was data to suggest don't pursue this guy. The age cliff, the carries, the changing teams. It hadn't been good for running backs who were changing teams. But then there's the other side of it, and that's the side that you have to consider as well. And it's why, like, to be quite frank, he's basically the best pick in fantasy right now from a value standpoint. Of any player on the entire board, you can maybe argue Lamar Jackson, but like there's that other side of it that I think is really important. And that's kind of where I want to get at with you with the next question, which is kind of like with all the data with everything that's changed, and you just kind of did a good breakdown of a good job breaking down what has changed. What has changed in your process, and how have you been able to parse through like not letting all this impact your process and trusting your process for evaluating players?
The process will start with watching. I do skip over, Alexander Madison runs for 3 yards. I'm not going to watch that play.
Yeah.
All right. I think I can figure out what may or may not have happened on that play, but I watch a majority of what's going on. And then I know that there's a lot to be made about the different types of coverages that defenses play. I've kind of realized that I can't start a guy. There's few exceptions. There's Indianapolis, there's Carolina, there's one other team. They play a lot of cover 3. Okay. So those teams that play cover 3 specifically, like 50% of the time, okay, maybe I can buy into how a quarterback has done against cover 3 in the past. But just because Carolina plays cover 3, and I think Pittsburgh might be the other team that plays a lot of cover 3. Let's say that it is. They've got different personnel. It's not the same thing. And it's kind of a point that I want to make when you brought up Derrick Henry and the points against Henry in the offseason, the age cliff and running backs changing teams. Listen, every player is his own individual. Just like some players come back from a torn ACL and they look amazing. And some players like Breece Hall last year. Okay. Some players, they need some time to come back from a torn ACL, like Javonte Williams. Everybody's different. You kind of you can't compare, somebody else's apple to your apple. And so that's the same thing when you're looking at cover 3 versus, Carolina's cover 3 versus somebody else's cover 3. I use man and zone, and I firmly hold the belief that the most impactful data point, a defensive data point against a quarterback, is pass rush pressure rate. And what that means is when a quarterback is hurried up, when the defense is able to get through to him, break through the offensive line and pressure him, how does that quarterback hold up? CJ Stroud last year, really good when there was pressure on him. This year, he's buns. It's gross watching CJ Stroud. You'll see it on Thursday night because the Jets will come after him. So I think that's the number one thing. I can look at man versus zone and dig into that a little bit too. But for the most part, I try and project what a defense will do against a certain quarterback every single week. And some defenses, what they're going to do. Okay. The Falcons, the Rams, they play heavy zone. It's what they do. Indy usually does that. The Jets, when they fired Saleh, they play a lot more man now. They blitz a lot more now. And I like to think that once we get kind of a track record, we can see where that goes moving forward. And then you get a game like last week where Todd Bowles, who is so much into zone defense and blitz the snot out of a quarterback, I think his blitz rate in the first half against Kirk Cousins was 5%.
Yeah,
which is like barely blitzing, which is why Kirk Cousins had time to throw downfield and to have a big game and really start with a big first half. And that's just something we're never going to know. We're never going to know. All right, this is the 1 week where Todd Bowles is going to flip everything and just be a completely different version of himself. The defense is going to be a different version. That's the thing that frustrates me. But for the most part, it's studying the defenses just as much as the offenses. And that way I've got an idea on how a team might operate against said defense.
Yeah, and I love that because that's the most important part of the process to me, the matchups, because every single matchup is so different. And you're right, there will be tendency breakers like the one you just said with Todd Bowles, which is interesting because you're never going to be able to really predict that. And I do love that you've taken the time to really get into the minutia of like, well, we can look at these stats of the Jets defense, but it's not really telling the full story because there's the Jets defense with Ulbrich and there's Jets defense with Saleh, and they're calling it in a different way. And that's the type of stuff that when you look into that, that's where you find the edges.
Sure, Dan, it's just like what has happened to the Lions run defense since Aiden Hutchinson got hurt.
Right.
They are not as good. I mean, the Titans were even able to run on them. It's only 2 games, small sample size, but though anytime there's a big change in personnel or coaching, you kind of have to forget about whatever the old data says. And you kind of have to forget about the old data anyway, because we're in week 9 and teams in week 9 are very different than they were in week 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. And then after that, we're going to get into some team stuff, some player stuff. And I'm going to get to pick the brains of both Dave and Jacob. All right, we're back here on Fantasy Football Today. We're talking with, and I know he doesn't like this, but I'm going to say it one more time, Hall of Famer, Dave Richard, one of my favorite people. And I want to start with some team breakdowns, Dave. I want to start with the Jets passing game. This is an offense that has been really weird to watch all season long. They're operating at first with one coordinator or one guy calling the play, or quote unquote calling the plays. And now they have a new guy in Todd Downing. Not a lot of pre-snap motion before he was there, a little bit more after. What are some of the things you've seen from the Jets passing game, and what can people expect moving forward? Because there's a lot of pieces here. Adams, Wilson.
Yeah, sure. I'll be as quick as I can on this. You've heard me on the main show say that Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson just seems like their timing's off a little bit. And ever since Davante Adams went to the Jets, Wilson and Rodgers have basically been on the same page. It's actually been wonderful to see. And Wilson, the more explosive receiver of the two, obviously. Do I dare say he's the better route runner? They're both really good route runners, but just the way that Garrett Wilson moves has excited me since he was at Ohio State. And he's starting to do those same things where you can't predict his route and you know that he's capable of running any route and doing it at a high level. So to me, I think Rodgers almost, I don't know if he's realized it or if he's just accepting it, that Wilson is the more explosive receiver of the two. Adams is still quick, just not as explosive of a runner. He gets open with footwork. He gets open with agility. He gets open with physicality, and he's not running a lot of deep routes, and he's playing in the slot a lot. That's where the Jets have kind of put him. Not like he's their exclusive slot receiver, but he's playing more in the slot now than he ever did in Las Vegas, and I think than he ever did in Green Bay. The bigger issue isn't necessarily Adams, because I know Adams has disappointed fantasy managers. I think Aaron Rodgers isn't seeing things perfectly. And I know there's throws that he'll make. They're 10 out of 10s. They're perfect. There were a couple last week to Wilson, actually. But I think he's a little slower to react, a little late on some throws. You'll remember the interception that he threw. I think it was the first interception in Pittsburgh where he pump fakes. Or I don't think he meant to pump fake. I think he meant to throw, and then he pulled it back. And then he threw again, and then he was late on that throw, and Beanie Bishop undercut the route, and it was an interception. There were moments where you could tell he sees a receiver open, and he doesn't fire. There was a post route to Davante, or Davante ran the post route in week 7, would have been a touchdown. Rodgers didn't throw it to him. Instead, he held the ball a little bit longer and then had to throw like just short of the end zone to Garrett Wilson. I don't think Wilson caught it. So I think the problems in New York, you can start with the offensive line, but I also think some of it is on Rodgers just being an older guy and not being as quick on the trigger as he was 2, 3, 4 years ago.
I think that's such a great take. I remember watching tape of Rodgers Green Bay against the Giants in 2022 and seeing these issues from a processing standpoint pop up, and no one really touched on them. No one talked about them as we headed into, we had an injured year last year, and it's something that you saw there. And a lot of people blame that on him having new receivers in Green Bay, which was a fair, I don't want to call it an excuse. That you get a lot of these. Like I've been dealing with them my whole for the last 6 years with Giants fans, with Daniel Jones. He doesn't have the O-line. He doesn't have this. but sometimes it's like not all about the ancillary pieces. Sometimes it's on the actual player. I think that's the case with them. Jacob, I wanted to get into it with you a little bit on this point. One thing I've noticed from watching the Jets is just how slow they are running this offense, man. I feel like, I don't know if this numbers back it up from a pace standpoint, but I don't think we're getting a lot of plays off. I feel like we're seeing a ton of, just anecdotally, I feel like we're seeing a ton of plays roll through the play clock all the way down to 5, 4, 3 seconds. Is that something that's been true? Because that will limit a fantasy offense.
Yeah, they're last in the NFL in pace of play. They're 15th in total plays, but I think that'll probably even out over a larger sample size. That's my thought watching Rodgers is he doesn't have, I don't think, the full elite traits that he has had. Maybe he's at like 85 or 90% of that, a little bit diminished with age and injury. And since he's insistent on not letting the offense be agile and unpredictable, he kind of likes to control everything. I think he's kind of been outgrown by the league. That's kind of how it looks, is like you have to be like the peak MVP level Rodgers to be able to do this the way you want to do this with the way defenses are playing right now, and it's not working.
Yeah. Let's pass it along to a different pass game here. This one's going to be interesting, I think, for fantasy managers listening now. Here we are in week 9, because there's some opportunity here for a free agent acquisition that you might have made earlier this week on the waiver wire, or potentially somebody you stashed earlier. Those two players being Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Panthers pass game right now. It's going to be Bryce Young for this week, at least. We don't know what's going to happen moving forward with Andy Dalton recovering from the injuries or whatever he sustained in the car crash. But Dave, what have you seen from the Panthers pass game, having a chance to watch them? What are your expectations for these two receivers, these two young receivers?
Well, I think first let's start with the quarterback. I think Bryce Young played a little bit better. And I mean, honestly, the expectations were low because of what we saw at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
But I felt like, especially on that first drive, and then there were moments throughout the game where I thought that Bryce Young played a little bit better. And I don't know what the difference really is, because I'm not in that locker room to know how he's grown and developed since he got benched. But that was a little bit encouraging to me. What was interesting to me was that the receiver that led them in route rate last week was David Moore.
Wow.
Who basically lined up wide. Didn't really see that. He saw 5 targets. It was kind of surprising to me, because you look in the box score and it's Jalen Coker scores a touchdown, Xavier Legette scores a touchdown. So why is this guy, we're going beyond the box score, why is this guy playing more, and why isn't he doing more? And I think it's just because it's David Moore and he's just an experienced receiver, and that's why he's out there. It's not because he's explosive. And so I did a little bit of scouting on Legette and Coker, and Legette's basically the same guy that I saw toward the end of the Senior Bowl. Good physicality. He's still capable of dropping passes. He had an ugly drop down the seam. Young had his timing down with him. That was a nice thing. Overthrown on a deep ball. Good concentration when defensive backs were close by. He's kind of a good physical receiver with some speed. And as long as those hands don't create more problems for him, I can imagine that Xavier Legette could be the best receiver in Carolina this year and next year. Jalen Coker's interesting, though, guys, because big dude, agile, not fast. That's always a problem. When you've got a receiver that can't run past people, then he better be really good at everything else. And I can't say that Coker is really good at everything else, but he's got potential to be, just kind of like a size receiver, possession guy, huge catch radius. There's something to him too. And if he's going to continue to play a lot, and he ran more routes last week than Legette did, although I think something might have happened to Legette in the fourth quarter that caused him to not play most of that quarter. Bottom line is, I think Coker's going to stick. I think Coker and Legette will be the top 2 receivers in Carolina. And we can make all kinds of jokes about Bryce Young, but if he's being worked in a positive way and this offense starts to get a little bit better, look, we know this team is going to play from behind a lot. That defense is the worst in the league. They can't get pressure on anybody. Don't get a paper cut around them. They won't be able to stop bleeding. That's how little pressure that they can get. I think that there will be targets and opportunities for both Legette and Coker. If you've got the roster space, carrying these guys to see what happens is not the worst idea in the world.
They're interesting. I will say Adam Thielen is probably coming back, and then this might be the worst offense from this point on. So don't get too excited with these guys. But I have liked what I've seen from both of them Coker, for what it's worth, has a higher separation score of the two receivers according to Fantasy Points data. I do think there's some savvy to his route running for a young guy. That's impressed me. I was curious if either one of you had any, now that we have some NFL film on League It, not just going against collegiate players, if you have any like thoughts on the way he moves. I think he's so unique and strange as a mover. Do you have any like comparisons? Like, he's so big, and I feel like he uses his frame well, but he uses his frame better than Quentin Johnston to create separation and wall off the defender. But he also looks awkward and goofy at times and kind of gets knocked around a little bit. I don't know. He's just a funny guy.
Yeah,
Now,
well, I'm sorry, Dan. I think he was a little raw when he came out. Remember, he only had the one big year in college, and he was in college for a long time. And so I still think he's got a lot of polishing to do as far as route running, no wasted movement, stuff like that. But he does have an interesting blend of, I don't know how tall Deebo Samuel is. I want to say he's like 5'10", 5'11". League at 6'1". So maybe he can be that same type of guy eventually, where he can just be used in a bunch of different ways and be a matchup headache for your typical leaner corner. But
Debo's big bro. Did you guys watch Receiver?
I'm sorry?
I said Debo is big bro. Did you guys watch Receiver? Him and League are like, they're real close.
Yeah, that's
South Carolina.
It's a good mentor to have.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm reminded watching him somewhat of a smaller version without the sharp cuts DK Metcalf type of player, just because of the way that Metcalf's been able to win in the NFL. Not traditional from the route running standpoint, not traditional from a lot of ways, but kind of get the ball around this player and he can make big things happen. That's kind of how I see it with Xavier Legret. I don't think Bryce Young is that kind of quarterback personally. I don't really know what Young is at this point. He won in different ways in Alabama that he's not able to win in the NFL. A lot of anticipatory throws and just being able to be at times a better athlete than some of the pass rushers that were coming at him. That's just not going to be the case at the NFL at any point. Though I do think he could potentially get better if the Carolina Panthers offense gets a little better. But Jacob's like my mini producer on the show, and he's let me know we're going a little long with some of these. So Dave, you have notes on the Bears, Commanders, and Steelers offenses. So I want to hear about those.
Well, you already know that Chicago's offense came out of the bye flatter than a pancake. They were a mess for the first three quarters. Caleb Williams was 4 of 13 passing for 36 yards. And then I'll use air quotes, got it going by completing 6 of 11 passes and having 95 yards in the fourth quarter. I thought that entire loss to Washington was an indictment on the coaching staff for not having Caleb ready to play, and for not really, like, I don't know what it was. Like, on top of the terrible coaching for Tyreek Stevenson, where he's running around before the play and then he tips the ball up in the air where the Hail Mary's caught, to letting the Commanders get 13 yards before the Hail Mary play, to a bunch of other things. The defense, it's supposed to be great. Combination of things happened. Number one, they allowed a bunch of drives that ended in field goals. I guess that's good that they bent but didn't break. But then when Montez Sweat went down with an injury, that's one that you've got to keep an eye on, because I don't think this Bears defense will be anywhere near as good without Montez Sweat. So that it troubled me quite a bit that they weren't rolling, because they went into the bye week looking pretty good. And so you've got to have some pause with Caleb Williams now, even in this matchup against Arizona. I wonder how many weeks it'll take before this Bears offense gets humming again. Last time they needed the run game to get going, and that's what they needed against Washington as well. The Commanders offense, I thought that for everything that Jayden Daniels went through last week, early practicing and all that, and then he went out and played in Chicago, I thought he looked great. And it's really just one of the offenses in the league that is so much fun. I'm a little surprised they didn't try and upgrade at wide receiver, and that they're standing pat with what they have. We'll see what the next week brings, but maybe Carolina didn't get a good offer, or maybe Washington wasn't interested in adding another receiver like a Deontay Johnson added to that offense. Right. I think we'd be pretty excited about that. But Terry McLaurin looks like a number one. Zach Ertz, as long as he's healthy, he looks like a top 12 fantasy tight end, and a guy who more and more is starting to build up his target volume and really becoming relied on as a key figure in that offense. And then the Steelers offense, I'd love to pick your brains on this one. Could it be as simple as Russell Wilson, just a competent quarterback and a competent thrower, giving confidence to everybody else in that offense? And that's why the Steelers offense has looked so good over the last 2 weeks compared to where they were with Justin Fields. Fields more of like a, bullet thrower. Russell Wilson rather has put the ball up high in the air, and he's really crushing it on those sideline routes, dropping it in the bucket. Najee's been running really well. Just, I don't know if Russ came and he gave everybody like magic Gatorade or something like that, and now they're all playing at their highest level. But that offense is really looking great. And I think they deserve some credit for it. And Arthur Smith does too, for putting together a much better offense with almost the same personnel, save for the quarterback.
Yeah, I have a few quick notes on them just because I had a chance to watch them extensively on tape against the Giants this week. I think what it comes down to and this is why they made the decision to go to Russell Wilson. He has so much better command of that offense and of the huddle and of concepts that Arthur Smith wants to run. And they run a lot of different concepts now, both in the run game and the passing game. Early on, he had some boot action stuff to try to get Russell Wilson on the move, find some easy solutions. And then later on, he had a lot of these two-man route combos off these play action drops. This is like classic Russell Wilson stuff dating back to Seattle, where it just allows him to throw with anticipation, which he does a good job of, not over the middle of the field, but on the outs, the outside the number stuff, and use his ball placement, use his arm talent, which is still there. Like some of the throws he made, the throw he made to Pickens at the end of the game is legitimately one of the best throws any quarterback has made on tape this season that I've watched. Now I've watched 7 quarterbacks plus Daniel Jones every game and plus whatever we've watched for Beyond the Box Score. And so that's a lot of quarterbacks at this point. And that was legitimately one of the best throws I've seen. He walked it to him. He put it between 2 defenders. And it's that anticipation, Dave. I think it's that command of the offense. I think it's an understanding of where receivers are supposed to be, understanding of space. That's the key, understanding of space. That just always has escaped Justin Fields. Unfortunately, he's got physical tools. He can get the ball there faster than Russell Wilson can. But does that matter? It's all kind of about anticipating where the space is and throwing it into that space. And that's something Russell Wilson does an excellent job of. And I was super impressed because the Giants defense came in having stopped a lot of offenses. Like Eagles got them a little bit, mostly just through the run game and one throw over the top. Bengals, they shut down, right? They shut down a lot of these good offenses. Even the Commanders had a little bit of trouble. They couldn't get the ball in the end zone against the Giants. So Russell Wilson, he moved the ball better than I had seen. So I'm very excited about the Steelers offense moving forward.
Yeah, and he does unlock things for the run game because defenses have to worry about more areas of the field. Can't stack the box as much. We've seen lighter boxes for Najee. I also want to shout out Arthur Smith. We give this guy a lot of crap, but he's been a little bit adaptable with his personnel, which has been a thing that he's really been knocked for.
Yes,
they haven't been quite as just like exclusively outside zone heavy as in the past, which I think makes sense with Najee. He's not the same type of bursty runner that gets to the edge and then cuts it vertical like Derrick Henry can or something like that, or even like Bijan and Algier. Like I don't think he has the same burst as those guys. So they've done a little bit more man gap than we've seen in the past, and I think the run game has looked really, really good last few weeks.
Yeah, and even when they get adjusted to like that's what I think he's done a great job of. He was running the ball early against the Giants, outside runs, cutbacks to the C gap, and then that type of stuff. Giants adjusted to that, and what he was able to do in the pass game, that was a good adjustment by Arthur Smith. Here's the thing with Arthur Smith, like we knocked him, and it got ugly in Atlanta, but his quarterbacks were like Mariota and Desmond Ridder. These are not NFL quarterbacks. In the end,
he's always designed efficient offenses.
Yes. Even with those guys, he found sometimes efficiency. In the end, it does come a lot down to quarterback play. I hate to say it, but it's true. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and then I want to get into some stuff with Dave. It's called Dave's Advanced Stats, all the stuff he's dug up over the week. One of the best, in my opinion, pure articles you can get on our site throughout the year. And it's changed, and there's different variations of it, but now it's referred to as lineup decisions. Is Dave's lineup decisions, and it comes out on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the day, depending on the week, I should say. There's always stuff going on, and Dave's digging deep, and he's grinding through the tape. But what you get in that is a lot of what you're about to get in this next segment. So I want you to listen to it, and if you enjoy it, please check that out. But real quick, we're going to take a break first. All right, we're back. Dave, I want to get into some of your advanced stats. You can go rapid fire. You can go however you like, but give me some goods.
Let's start with the Chargers offense. Since the bye, Herbert's been attempting 35 passes per game. His completion rate's at 65%. Yards per attempt is 8.2. That's the same as his ADOT, by the way. His off-target rate is 5.7%. He has no interceptions. So why isn't he a must-start in fantasy? 3 touchdowns. That's it. That's all he's thrown in the 3 games since, and he had 2 last week. Who's been getting the job done for him? You know, it's been Ladd McConkey. He's got the highest route rate, but one of the big changes they made since the bye was getting Will Dissly more involved. And I'm not here to tell you that Will Dissly is a must-start fantasy tight end, but I will tell you that he's running an almost 70% route rate, averaging 7.6 targets per game since the bye. His ADOT is minuscule. It's 4.6 yards. His route depth is 5.5 yards, and he's still just getting those opportunities. 28% target per route run rate. Just somebody who seems to be involved more than just a 1 week thing. I thought it was just a 1 week thing for the Chargers a couple of weeks ago, and they decided to just kind of keep him in there. He might end up being the new short area guy because Ladd McConkey can start working further downfield. His ADOT isn't too high. It's 9.8. That's still pretty good. And he's obviously getting a huge target share, but not as much as Dissly. Like I told you, Dissly's at 28%. McConkey, who's running more routes, to be fair, 20.4% target per route run rate. I think McConkey's real deal, borderline number 2 fantasy receiver. Dissly is for now on the radar as a bench tight end in PPR, bye-week replacement tight end. I don't think anybody's making a beeline to go get him, but another big game, and people are going to start buying in.
Will Dissly has the highest first read target rate over the past 2 weeks. And so that's not even on a per route basis. He has the highest percentage of the team's total first read targets. They're using him as like an extension of the run game because people have really been keying on the run lately.
Mm-hmm. And I know you had some insight onto how the Eagles defense has changed since their bye week. What do you have there?
They rank 4th in running back rush yards per carry allowed at 3.6. Second in 5+ yard rush rate allowed. So the percentage of rushing plays where they give up 5 or more yards, 18.4%. That's really low. They've only given up the 1 rushing touchdown, not even 50 rush yards or 80 total yards to a single running back since the bye. They're playing much better up front, much better disciplined team. This is not a good week to start Tank Bigsby.
Oh, I like that. And it's so interesting because think just from doing this for so long, all three of us, even obviously we're not at your level with that regard, Dave, but we've watched a lot of Fangio defenses. And the common theme with every Vic Fangio defense, and he's obviously defensive coordinator for the Eagles, is it takes time. It takes time for these players to play together. And I think within the run game, you've seen that because I watched them a couple weeks ago against the Giants. They are just so in sync and they're playing their gap responsibilities so I don't want to say wisely, that's not the right word, but so in sync together, and they understand their responsibilities so well in that run game. I think that's a trend that will continue, and I like that you pointed that one out. I wanted to ask you a little bit also about Jared Goff. I know you have some notes on him. I just want to give a quick aside. I listened to John Gruden, who to me is still a phenomenal ball knower, and he grinds tape now all week, and he said that Jared Goff is playing the quarterback position, just how you're supposed to be playing it, better than anyone in the NFL right now. He compared him to how Joe Montana was playing the position. Wild praise, but I want to hear what you have on the Lions and Goff.
Well, remember what the deal used to be against Goff was once you pressure him, he goes into the fetal position and he's no good anymore. He's still better when he's not pressured, but he's not bad when he is pressured, and that's been the case this whole season. His ADOT's been higher when he's pressured, his touchdown rate higher when he's not pressured. Everything else is about the same, and everything else is good. So he's starting to become one of those quarterbacks where no matter how you defend him, he's going to be able to make a play. And that's the easiest type of quarterback to start in fantasy, because usually that means good stats come along with it, and the toughest type of quarterback to come up with a game plan against. And it helps that he's got a whole fortress in front of him with that offensive line. He's awesome versus man and zone. His touchdown rate against man coverage, and I maybe some of this is a Jameson Williams stat, but it's 15.2%. Wow. It's insane. But if a defense ever dared to play heavy man coverage against the Lions, and I don't think Green Bay will do that. They've been mostly zone. They have played more man on third
coming. We need a Jags matchup coming for that.
Right. We need and I don't even know why the Jaguars are doing that. It's ridiculous.
No one does.
We have seen Green Bay play more man on third down lately. We'll see if they do it this week.
Okay.
You could look for Jared Goff to have some big numbers in those moments.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. And then one final couple players I want to talk about. The Colts offense made a big change this week. They went from Anthony Richardson to Joe Flacco. I'm a proponent of it. I know a lot of people are not understanding it on Twitter, but look, when you're in that locker room and one guy is keeping the offense so much more on time, so much more on schedule, giving their receivers a chance to make plays, that's the player who's going to play. That's just how it is in the NFL. It's not like they don't look forward. It's not everyone's playing 30,000 foot view. So from what you've seen, Dave, and the stats that you've dug into, what does this mean for Josh Downs? What does this mean for these Colts wide receivers?
It's good. Obviously, because they're finally going to have a quarterback that can complete more than half of his throws in the game, and it'll probably be closer to 65% of his throws. Josh Downs in 3 games with Joe Flacco this year, his floor in PPR is 15.9 points. He has at least 8 targets in each game, at least 7 catches in each game, and he's taking on a Vikings defense. Listen, Minnesota allows, I think it's the most fantasy points to receivers, period. But against slot receivers, they've been terrible over their last 4 games. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to receivers who line up in the slot. It is a massive liability. And Josh Downs plays in the slot 77% of the time. He is an easy number 2 fantasy wide receiver. I'd be much more in on Michael Pittman if I believed he were healthy. Because when you watch him play, he makes the effort. God bless him. But he's not dominating on contested catches. And I don't know if he's playing at as full of a speed as he normally does. Not that he's the speediest guy, but I think there's something kind of holding him back. And I wanted to double check the numbers of Pittman with Joe Flacco. It's been 3 games. One of them 14.7 PPR points, one of them 12.5, one of them 9.3. And 2 of them involve touchdowns. Obviously, the double-digit games involve touchdowns. So maybe he can finally come through on another jump ball from inside the red zone. But I think Josh Downs is the one that fantasy managers should feel excellent about starting with Flacco.
Oh, yeah.
What do you
Josh Downs is the man. I've got a couple stats just to back up and supplement what Dave got there. Jared Goff produced 50 air yards in week 8. The Lions scored 52 points. It's the first time during the air yardage era that an offense produced more points than air yards. So that's fun.
Life as a Lions fan is fun right now. Let me just say.
Oh, yeah. They're like easily the most fun team to watch, I think. Like, I love watching David Montgomery.
I'm like, fans show up at the stadium and they're like gonna get 40 to 50 points every week from their team. It's just crazy.
It's so good. Fantasy points per route run, leaders without Anthony Richardson on the field. We've got AJ Brown, 0.76, Rashee Rice, 0.74, Nico Collins, 0.66, Josh Downs, 0.64, Justin Jefferson, 0.63. So there he is, sandwiched between Nico and Justin Jefferson. That's pretty good company. He had the highest separation score in week 8 of any player.
There's a reason for that.
He also had the highest win rate. So if you want to, say that like one big play affected the separation score, win rate is the percentage of his routes where he was charted as winning. So that is more like a success rate where it takes into account consistency. I think he's just separating and playing at one of the highest levels of any receivers in the NFL right now. He can just absolutely torch you in the short game with lateral quickness, and he can beat you down the field to win contested catches, as we saw when he went up and high pointed that ball on what could have been a second touchdown. He almost had one of the highest wide receiver scores last week with Anthony Richardson playing.
This guy me of like Hunter Renfrow with the ability to win on the vertical plane, which is crazy to think about.
The sky's the limit with Downs. I heard Sigmund Bloom on the couch yesterday. Bloom said, I feel like we're going to look back and any trade you make for Josh Downs at this point, you're going to think is a win.
Yes.
He's like, even it feels like, he's cost prohibitive because people are so excited. You see all these stats. He's like, but if you can get anyone to trade you Josh Downs, I think you're probably going to be happy you did that trade.
Agreed. But it does mean that Flacco's got to stay the quarterback the rest of the season.
Yes.
If by any stretch the Colts fall out of playoff contention, it makes it easy for them to go right back to Richardson. But I think the timing of this, I think there were a lot of reasons that went into why they pivoted to Flacco. Obviously, performance, one of them. He may have lost the locker room by tapping out from a play, but they're about to play Minnesota, Buffalo, and the Jets. And these are 3 defenses. Say what you will about the Jets defense, but 3 defenses that are not going to be easy for a quarterback to go up against. And it's better to go with the established quarterback, versus the off-target young quarterback with great athletic traits who might not be able to help you pull out a win.
I completely agree with that personally, though. I know a lot of people disagree. They look at it 30,000-foot view, like what's the point of playing Flacco? But again, these guys are paid. They're playing for their lives.
They want to win.
They want to win. They have to. They not only want to win, that the receivers want opportunities and they want on-target throws and they want the offense to stay in rhythm. And that's what Flacco can do. And he's proven it. We're running out of time. We always do on Beyond the Box Score. It's kind of how things go. We try to keep it 50 minutes or under, which I don't think we ever have, Jacob and I. So we go as close as we can. But I want to wrap up the show by talking about a few things, some offenses that have impressed us and some players that have impressed us. So I want to do a couple look aheads here. I want to first start, actually, I see a few on the list here, but I want to start with the Rams because I had a good chance to watch that Island game. And then I went back and watched the tape because I was doing a cut up of Matthew Stafford. To me, when they're all healthy, that means Puka and Cooper, and the offensive line is not a shamble of itself. And obviously Stafford is the quarterback. That is arguably on a per play basis, on a per series basis, one of the most, if not most efficient offenses in the NFL. And what impresses me so much of watching tape of Matthew Stafford, I don't know any quarterback that currently does it like him. And what I mean by that is he gets into his drop back and he finds his location point in the pocket, and that's it. He'll settle in there and he'll work from that point. He may do a shuffle and reset to his left. He may step up a little bit to reset above. But what he's doing at that point is working through the entire full field progression. And he'll hit backside digs. He'll hit just about any concept a coach can scheme up for him. And he has such a good awareness of where things are. When you get to that point, like, it's very difficult to scheme a defense to stop a player like that. If you also have receivers who can win routes, and when Cooper Kupp and Puka are on the field, you have those receivers. So to me, this could be potentially one of the best offenses moving forward in the second half. Where are you guys at with the Rams? I'll start with you, Dave.
I agree 100%. And the nice thing about it, the exciting thing about it is it's almost like everything's kind of coming together for LA. It's like a fantasy team that has 6 guys who are hurt and they all come back at the same time. And your fantasy team might have a 3-5 record, but you know that if everybody just stays healthy and stays on the field, you're going to just do nothing but dominate. And so they got their receivers back. Their offensive line will get healthy. They're going to get a couple guys back there too. Their defense has started to play well. Jared Verse has been playing well. I think this is a team that can win the NFC West and be a problem in the playoffs. But they've got to keep everybody on the field, and that's obviously a big if. But at bare minimum, even if they were to lose one of those receivers or one of those linemen, they've got some players that are now depth players who have some experience from when the other guys were out the first time. And so maybe they can stay competitive with Matthew Stafford out there. But they absolutely look great in week 8. And they are schemed so well on both sides of the ball.
What do you got, Jacob? Anything on the Rams?
Oh, yeah. So since the start of 2023, when we have Stafford, Puka, and Kupp on the field, the Rams are at 0.14 EPA per play. Only the Ravens and Commanders are ahead of that this year. And in terms of success rate, offensive success rate, they're at 51%, which would rank behind only the Chiefs, Lions, Bucks, Ravens, and Commanders. So to your point about them being potentially one of the best offenses in the NFL, I think that is real. The offensive line has played admirably, I think, with these guys out. They've got an undrafted rookie at left tackle who's just like maybe one of their best pass protectors so far. And they do have guys coming back. Stafford has been getting the ball extremely quickly lately, the last couple of weeks. The week 7 game, he didn't have a single throw that took longer than 3 seconds, which was the first time that he's done that since 2020. That's really insane to operate an entire game, drop back without one throw that took longer than 3 seconds. And so I think like what you can't say enough about what Sean McVay is doing. You can't say enough about what Kyron Williams has done to handle the load to get them to this point. And I do think that the ceiling for this offense is as high as it is for anybody going forward.
And I love the point Dave made about those ancillary pieces, because it's like the role that they played earlier when the other receivers were injured is going to allow them now to see what we're going to get. Like the other night where Demarcus Robinson makes 2 huge plays because of the attention that's focused on these other players. Just going to help that offense overall. Just going to help Stafford. I agree with all the praise for McVay, but I want to make it clear that Stafford deserves a lot of the praise as well, because the reason he's getting that ball out quick is because he has such a great understanding of where everyone is within the route combinations and where the defense is, and processing that space. It's next level. I'm excited about them. I love watching them play football.
It's so good to have Puka back, dude. I listened to Football 301 with Matt Harmon and Nate Tice this morning, and Matt said Puka Nacua is a life-affirming player. He just exudes football joy. And I'm like, that is so true, man. He changes things. Like everything about the energy of the team looks different when he's out there. And I don't know if this makes sense, but I thought he looked bigger and like more explosive and more physical than ever before. I know that's silly, but like
look back at last year to know. I don't know if
maybe it's just because I've been watching the Rams with like smaller receivers, but man, he just looked like a monster out there.
I want to talk also about the Bills offense, because I feel like we finally look. I've had a I don't want to be a negative Nancy on this, but I haven't loved Joe Brady as much as others have. I feel like he's limited that offense to me in some ways. I get the concept. I understand it was working to some extent, but I feel like in the last 2 weeks, they've started to figure something out in the pass game specifically. So I want to know if you guys have anything on if that's true, if you've also seen this little of evolution in their pass game and what we can expect moving forward.
Something clicked with Keon Coleman, because the last 2 weeks he's And this is tough to quantify too, but he's playing with more confidence. You can tell that it looks like he knows what he's doing. Whereas earlier in this year, I'm not sure if we could have said that. And I don't think it's just as simple as, well, Amari Cooper's there, so he's got to get his act together. No, I think he's been working toward this. And I think he's being rewarded with some targets that he's earned. He's got 7 in each of his last 2 games. I think it's at least 16 PPR points in each of his last 2 games. And he's dominating by climbing the ladder and going up for those high balls from Josh Allen, whether they're in the end zone or on a crossing pattern, what have you. And he's the biggest benefactor of all since Amari Cooper has come to town. We thought that Amari Cooper would just soak up targets and be the number 1 guy. It hasn't worked out that way. And I can't say with full confidence that it will consistently ever be that way, because now they've got Cooper, Coleman, Shakir in the slot. That could end up being a really dangerous and really difficult threesome to try and contain down the stretch and into the playoffs. And I remember everybody, including myself, I was worried Josh Allen doesn't have anybody to throw to. And now we're at the midpoint of the season, and he's got some really good receivers to throw to, and a tight end, and a running back, and that line is healthy, and the defense is playing well.
I love
Buffalo
it.
Bills were 20th in pass rate over expectation per fantasy points data before the Amari Cooper trade. Over the past 2 weeks, they're first in the NFL
Let's
in
go.
pass rate over expectation. With that said, I think the running game is really what has been like making it all work. They've been varying it up a little bit. They've been doing more inside zone, not quite as much man gap. I wonder if that's just a counter to what people are expecting, because they were so just like smash mouth man gap early in the year. And man, James Cook, I don't know if it's like Ray Davis played so well that it lit a fire under him or something, but he has a fire under him. He's running really hard right now. He looks so good.
Yeah, they're a fun team to watch. All right, now we're going to wrap up the show, and we don't have that much time. We're going to do some rapid fire on some players who have impressed us the most in 2024 and what we're expecting the rest of the way. Let's start with Jayden Daniels, probably the most exciting player. I'll just start with what has impressed me the most. It's how calm, collected he is in the pocket, specifically under pressure. There were big drawbacks for me. Like, I won't call them drawbacks, but just red's not even the right color. Let's call them like orange flags that I had in his profile coming into the NFL. One that we'll never be able to answer, which is, can that size hold up? And that's going to be something we'll have to monitor throughout. But one of the bigger ones that wasn't size related was in college there. He had a big tendency when he escaped the pocket to keep his head down and just run. Now I feel like somehow he's already stepped in and he can manage the pocket. He keeps his eyes downfield, and he's almost at his best when you put some pressure on him and make it uncomfortable for him on some of these third downs. Is that something you've seen, Dave, or what's impressed you about Jayden the most?
Well, I was going to say one of the offenses that impressed me the most has been Washington, and Jayden Daniels might be that player who ends up being the fantasy MVP. They're 3rd in offensive points per game. They have yet to miss on a 4th down conversion this year. They are getting 22.6 first downs per game. That's 3rd best. They're 3rd in yards per game at 396.3, 3rd in yards per play. Their offensive total EPA is best in the NFL, and they are really running strong. And even in the game where Marcus Mariota played, that offense looked good. And so, like, both quarterbacks get it. Both quarterbacks are comfortable. Cliff Kingsbury still does some of the things that we've known him to do, but he's also been letting them attack further downfield. And the Commanders are one of those teams that's just really hard to defend.
It's crazy.
So I've got some stats on Jayden. He has the highest catchable ball rate on throws of 10 plus yards. So he's been very accurate down the field. I think that's pretty apparent and something that we could have expected.
My favorite stats about him coming out of LSU, Jacob.
What was it at LSU?
So accurate and rarely off target on those deeper throws. So that's something that translated to the next level.
One thing that really hasn't been something I expected, this was a clear red flag, not an orange flag from his collegiate data, was he had the highest sack to pressure ratio in college. Through 2 months of football, he is 14th out of 37, meaning 14th lowest. His sack to pressure rate is actually below the league average. That's sick. If that keeps going, like, that's going to be a huge, huge development for him.
And that's also more credit to Cliff Kingsbury, somebody I have, and we all somewhat have buried at times. But like, getting him to this point where you're seeing those numbers get to where they are, like that specifically is a big change in his game that's helped. And I really think the Mariota point is so impressive because I watched Mariota with Arthur Smith and that was just unbelievable to watch, like watching Drake London tape and just seeing how bad he was and just to get that confidence. When players get confident within a scheme, you can see really good things happen. Let's transition a little, talk some backs. I always love talking running backs with Dave because I view Dave as the running back whisperer. I view Dave as the guy who knows his backs and is always locked in on those top backs. So unfortunately, and I don't want to say unfortunately, but I guess coincidentally, I don't know, Jacob, how I could say this word because I'm going to blame you for this. It's going to come off as a little bit of a brag, the guys we're about to talk about, because these are literally all guys that Jacob and I love the tape of and called like
we're good at what we do. Okay, just call it what it is. Take the victory lap. I don't who cares what the commenters say.
We're 8 weeks.
You're welcome. You're welcome, commenters.
Yeah,
we're going to take a victory lap.
Loving these guys in the preseason. But I want to talk about a few players here with you. I want to start with one that Jacob and I were just so impressed with watching in the preseason, and now it's carried over. It's Bucky Irving with the Bucks. What have you seen from Bucky Irving?
He's good. He's physical. I don't think he's the fastest running back on the Bucks. I think that would belong to Sean Tucker, actually. But I think he's their best do-it-all type of running back. And that's why he's playing. Certainly will get some short yardage opportunities. Last week, more of them went to Rachaad White. And the fact that he had 7 targets and 7 catches last week tells you that he can still bring some of that passing game chops that he had in college into the National Football League. So I like what I've seen from him. I'm hoping that we see more of it.
I love the play 2 weeks ago where it looked like Baker was about to get sacked. Bucky tried to block, didn't quite get it. And then he just was like, actually, there's space here. I can just run out for a route. And Baker found him. And it's like, I love to see that trust developing with those two. I do have stats I have to share with Bucky. He's my favorite running back in the NFL. He has the second highest explosive run rate behind only Jonathan Taylor. He has the 4th highest missed tackles forced per run rate among running backs with 50 or more carries. So he's creating big plays. He's explosive. You see him with just insane creativity on these runs, being able to reverse field and make something out of nothing. Even with that said, with the explosives, he's also keeping the offense on track with positive plays. He has the 4th highest percentage of his runs that have gained positive yardage in the entire NFL. So he's doing it all. He's so good.
3.76 yards after contact per rush is 13th best. I believe that's of over 100 qualifying running backs.
Just incredible. Yeah, and he's not even doing it at this point on a small sample size because they've given him touches. So it's like, this is a real deal. Very exciting player moving forward. We're running out of time, so let's kind of maybe go a little rapid fire on some more of these players. It's on the list, guys. It's not my fault, but it's Tyrone Tracy. I want to hear what you guys think about Tyrone Tracy.
Explosive runs, 10th in explosive runs. He's top 12 in missed tackles forced as well. This is per fantasy points data. He's awesome. The only game that he didn't have over 100 yards was against the Eagles. Like Dave pointed out, they're playing really, really well against the run lately. But yeah, he's the man.
And what did he do through the air in that game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. We haven't even really unlocked the full potential, I don't think, with his ability to contribute as a receiver too.
I mean, I'm not crazy. Didn't he do something, or am I misplaced?
He's been used on the screen game, but they haven't really found a way yet to truly unlock him. Yeah.
Okay. No, I thought that there was a game that Tracy had. It was Cincinnati when he had 6 for 57. So
yeah, he did have a lot of receptions against Cincinnati. They couldn't do much.
And that's what he used to be, was a receiver. So I really want to see that part of his game come out even more. And then we're talking about a guy who might end up being one of the better 3-down backs in the league.
That's what it comes down to. The Giants have to figure that out. They had a play against, they've used a lot of empty where they motion him out, which is nice. They had a play against Dallas where they motioned him out of empty, had him run a vertical. It was almost a touchdown. It got called back by penalty. Look for that. But I can wax poetic about Tracy. I mean, I think he has all the traits. But one thing that's most important from a fantasy standpoint is the Giants seem committed to, when he's healthy, and we'll see what happens with the concussion protocol this week, making him essentially the featured back. That's what they turned him into this last week against the Steelers. It was not what we were expecting. It was not came back to a split with Singletary. Maybe he's playing a little less, 40%. No, he was essentially on the field for almost all the snaps. Even at the end, when you look at the final snap shares, a lot of that is just kind of skewed by him getting injured in the game. And then it was all Singletary from that point on, maybe with one snap of Gray. So just something to keep an eye on. This could be like a literal league winner down the stretch. All right. What about Tank Bigsby? I can't believe you put him in here, Jacob. This is like my early favorite call.
He's been so good, man. We have to keep talking about him. I think him and Bucky, an important point to bring up with both of them is their success rate is really, really high. And that's often a team stat. And that what's so impressive is when you compare them to their backfield counterparts. It's been so horrible in terms of rushing success for Jacksonville over the past couple of years. Same thing this year with ETN, but Bigsby is actually top 15 in success rate. Same thing in Tampa Bay. Bucky is top 10 in success rate, whereas Rashad White ranks 35th. And they've been the least successful running game over the past 2 years in Tampa Bay. So I just want to shout out those guys because they're creating explosive plays. We know Bigsby, averaging almost 6 yards per carry, has been creating tons of explosives, but he's also rushing successfully consistently.
I would love to see success rate become part of the regular fantasy vernacular. That's how coaches deem whether or not a player is really good, or maybe more of like consistent versus inconsistent. And the rules of whether or not a play is successful vary on the down and distance of each play. So, for example, if it's 1st and 10 and the player gets you at least 5 yards, that's a successful play. If it's 3rd and whatever, it's converting the 3rd down, whether it's 1 yard or 15 yards, that's considered a successful play. 2nd down, you have to get half the yards. And if people accept what success rate means and they understand that that's just a sign of how good a player is, that's something that I think could help people see who's going to be helpful down the line as far as fantasy production goes.
Yeah, because production is so dependent on volume. In preseason, it's harder for us to predict the volume, but in season, you can predict it based on things like that. So I think it's definitely a great stat that we can start to look into and project moving forward. We have other guys on the list, but we're going to pass there because we are already way over. We're just going to do one final guy, though, because Jacob wants to talk about him, and I think Dave will as well. It's Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver for Buffalo. We didn't get a chance to talk to him about him a little bit earlier. Any thoughts there from either of you?
Yeah, we've got to talk about Shakir. Khalil Shakir and Brian Thomas Jr. have the same target per route run rate, and basically their stats across the board are the same in terms of per route data. How is that possible? Khalil Shakir has a 3-yard average depth of target.
Yeah.
Brian Thomas Jr.'s is 13 yards. You would think you would need like way more targets than BTJ to have the same level of efficiency on a per route basis, but he doesn't. They have an identical target per route run rate. So how do they have the same efficiency? Because Khalil Shakir literally catches everything. And then he creates a bunch of yak. Like in terms of yards per target, he's first over this past 2 years. And the only one is close is Nico Collins. He's insanely good. And we are seeing the offense now finally start to incorporate him more and like funnel things through him. His first read target rate's been at 28 and 33% over the past 2 games. It had never been above 25% of a game prior to that. We've seen them, for whatever reason, try to replace Shakir with Curtis Samuel, with Deontay Hardy, with Trent Sherfield. That's literally, they're playing those guys ahead of him at the beginning of the year last year. Shakir had like a 10% snap rate in week 1 last year, but he forces his way into a role because he literally does it all. And finally, we're seeing it where it's like, yes, this guy is good. He needs to be a feature part of the offense. And the offense looks so good. Pass rate over expectation way up these past 2 weeks. I've got Shakir as a top 15 fantasy receiver this week. And it sounds insane, but like all of the math checks out as long as they don't yank him around like they seem intent on doing over and over and over. If they actually are going to trust him going forward, then man, I think this guy's gonna be a monster for fantasy down the stretch.
He has 421 yards this year. 300 of them have come after the catch.
Wow.
It's unfathomable. And then Jacob said that he literally catches everything. That's not true. Don't lie to the people. He has 36 catches on 38 targets.
Yeah.
A 94.7% catch rate.
Unreal.
So crazy.
He's fantastic. He'll never be double teamed. And because teams are always playing their safeties back so much against Buffalo, and they play zone a lot against Buffalo,
Yeah, that's all you can do.
He's really going to eat them up. So they say pick your poison. The poison that a lot of defenses choose is Khalil Shakir, and it's been costing them.
I love that. I actually want one more player to wrap on a bonus here. It's the only reason I want to get to him is because it's a player that both you and I, Dave, were most. And one thing I'll preface by saying this: one thing that I love about what we do here at CBS is I think we do probably more mock drafts than any site or any outlet during our mock draft season.
No doubt.
Laughing because there's no doubt about it. And since we've started our Draftathon St. Jude drive, it's only gotten even crazier and more intense. But no one besides you and I, Dave, were drafting this player as aggressively. And I was a far second. You drafted him even more aggressively than me. So I want to hear about, I don't need to hear about what led you to him. I know what that is. We watched his tape, but what you've seen from this player since making him somebody you wanted to draft a lot. And it's Brock Bowers, the tight end for the Raiders, because he's been one of the biggest wins at any position, let alone tight end this season. So what have you seen from now watching tape of him in the actual NFL?
He's a beast, and he's very good at just catching the ball, turning upfield, and shrugging off defenders and getting numbers after contact. And I don't think he's, as good as Khalil Shakir, but I'll give you the numbers. He has 535 yards this year. 280 of them have come after the catch. He actually leads all. No, that's not right. I thought I was saying he was going to lead all tight ends in total yards after catch. No, it's just on the Raiders, and that's something that you'd expect from him. He needs volume, and that was the one thing that I was worried about at the beginning of the year, maybe back in August, because Devontae Adams was there. But then Devontae left, and Bowers he was getting good volume anyway, even with Devontae. And now Devontae's been traded. I still think that volume will be high. I am a little nervous with Jacoby Myers coming back. Myers led the Raiders in targets last week. Could he be someone that has as many, if not a little more, in terms of target share from Brock Bowers moving forward? I laid out the case this week to sell high on Bowers, knowing that you could find it's really because of the tight end landscape just across the board. If you could get something great for Brock Bowers, you'll be able to find another tight end either via trade on the cheap or off your waiver wire who can give you 70% of Bowers, but you're helping yourself at a different position by trading away a chess piece like Bowers. But yeah, you know this, Dan, like back in August, I was telling everybody, I'm drafting this guy in round 10, whether I need a tight end or not. And I did it in a lot of my leagues. He's one of my most rostered players, and I've got a lot of success because of Brock Bowers.
And we got to take our wins sometimes. All right, Jacob, do you have anything?
I just want to win my leagues and help everybody else.
I know. I'm only kidding. But it is fun sometimes when you have a conviction on a player and it does end up working out.
Sure.
That's just part of what it is. Like we're humans too. We're here to give you guys the best advice we can, and that's our objective. But we also do like when what we foresee happening actually does come true. So on that note, we've gone a little overboard. Thank you so much for everybody tuning in. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Love to just talk ball. And it's funny because, we all do our thing during the season. We're on some shows, but, I don't get a chance to be on shows with you much at all, Dave, just the way the schedule has kind of shaken out and the way that, it's set up.
We're busy.
So it's fun to
That's how it goes.
Yeah, it's fun to actually talk ball with you. And
well,
Jacob,
and it's fun. It's fun to talk with a legendary tennis player as well.
Not legendary, but certainly better than Adam Azer. And I will, refer to the 6-2-6-0 final score for that, for anybody doubting it. But next year is going to be a different game. We're going to have to see what happens. He's going to continue to play, and I'm going to stop playing. Not that I have since, but, it's a lot of fun. Thank you to everybody tuning in. One thing that I should be asking at the top of the show, and I need to start getting better at that. For real. You got to help us out. You got to hit the like button right now. If you watch this whole show and didn't hit like, I hate to tell you, but you're hurting our show. So please help us grow. We're in the beginning stage of this. We need your help and support. Subscribe and like. You're probably already doing that, but just comment and like. That's all we ask. On that note, have a great rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you soon.